Hemshech Hayim Beis, Volume 1, Chapter 151, page 296, Reish Tzadik Vav. So we're in the middle of Discourse 38. Keep forgetting if that's correct. Yeah, Kemereish Surim. And just the context is going back to Eid HaBligvul, Eid HaGvul, really a continued elaboration on what the Ovis accomplished. The Ovis, that means pre-Sinai. The work done then was in order to expand the boundaries and expand the containers to the point that they can receive the energy, which will set the stage for Sinai, which will bring in a whole new dimension. So he's speaking about the difference between how in existence itself there's levels of how that energy manifests. So there's Atzilus for Atzilus, there's Atzilus for Biyah, which technically in simple English means there's the energy as it is for its own entity, its own domain, and how it is reacting to another domain that's more diminished or more outside of itself. The example being that we spoke about Moichin and Midas, intelligence and application, ideas and application, or whenever you have a situation where you have something that is within itself, and then it has to reach what he calls a zulas, another, or a davar nivdal, or davar nifred. Basically, it's working its way toward the outside, and as such it needs to have a different type of energy, a different diminished energy. So the last chapter, the long chapter, was chapter 150, discussed it in Aveda. He's going to still continue and tie all the knots together, but essentially he's applying these ideas of Meichin and Midas, of Atzilus, as it is for itself. There's two types of Ilah va'olol. One that is similar to the cause and effect of the same personality, like a tree and its branch. And another type is like Meichin and Midas. One gives birth to the other. One is the root of the source of the other. One actually informs the other, but it's still of different personality, which is, of course, that's Meichin and Midas, intelligence and emotions. And now in 151 he continues, after we discussed 4 levels of his Hisbonenus that are supposed to awaken and arouse feelings toward the divine. It doesn't just happen on its own automatically. It begins with a contemplation, a meditation that leads to Midas. So he spoke 4 key steps. One is Hisbonenus Klali, what he called the general contemplation on what he calls creation. Essentially, the contemplation and the meditation on the comprehension of the process, how matter emerged. Matter meaning this whole material universe, ourselves, everything included. Which the universe itself, matter itself, dictates that it was not self-made. For the different reasons that he explained. Because it's finite, because it's made up of parts, it's a compound, etc. So that leads us to understand that there's an ayin, some type of mysterious, you can say, an unknown entity that's not like matter that put it here. So in a sense it's like a yediyas hashlila. It's like saying, we know it can't be a yesh, because a yesh from a yesh from a yesh cannot go infinitely, so it has to be something that's not a yesh. So you learn from matter, you learn what put it here must be something different than this. And that was what he calls the ayin aliki. So that's a contemplation that leads to, as he says, it may not lead, he said, and then he says, not only that, but you also contemplate on the meichus, on the quality of the sign. What is it like? We know it's not like the yesh, so what is it like? So though we don't have an exact description, but as he said, there is a kiruv, there is some relationship. Because we're not talking about atzmus, we're talking about some relationship, so they could get some sense. And there's gradations, there's a process of and progression of how it reaches us. So since there's some kiruv, you could have Hisbonenus. And what is this? This is the Hisbonenus, essentially this contemplation is the contemplation of... I'm sorry, that's Hisbonenus Klali, right, I'm sorry. Step 2 is Hisbonenus Prati. Taking this Hisbonenus Prati, as he put it, is Be'echus Ayin Aliki. What I just started saying is the step 2. The Echus of the Ayin Aliki. What kind of... what personality is like. And this is the main contemplation that we have during Baruch Shamar, where we go through the steps. How from pure energy, divine energy, began, he uttered and said there should be a world. He said that is Malchus of Ak, or it's Malchus of Ein Sof. That leads to Baruch Hu, which is, he calls it Keser of Atzilus, and all the levels, all the way to Malchus, all the way to the lowest levels of Biyah, both the Biyah HaKlolim, the macrocosm and the microcosm. And he concludes from this that all this, though it will not bring necessarily an emotion a particular motion, but it definitely brings a kiruv. You want to be close to this. You want to have a relationship with it because this is what brings. So this already refines you because you've gotten closer to contemplating not on what you are, the yesh, but that which brought it into being. Then comes the next step. The next step is to understand Eir Pnimi, how it affects us. This energy enters into us, gives us life. So this is already how it permeates existence and how we can see it in like a nefesh and a guf. And just like we long for the energy of our soul to give us energy, especially when we're weak, or we are, I think a better word is debilitated. I think that's even a better word. Same thing as that, when you contemplate on how the divine energy gives life to existence and to us, you also long to connect to it, to draw from it. And to draw from it, especially when there's halamas equivalent to spiritual halamas, but when there's a weakness where there's a concealment. He says, so this brings that. He says, sometimes it'll also bring a sadness, but because of the sheker, of how the world is hepech ha'emes legamri, as he puts it, completely contrary to truth. But that is primarily work before davening, tikkun chatzos. But the prayer itself, the time of prayer is mainly the simcha of that gilui, which in turn that now brings that's a simcha, and that mezeder ba'ava. Here we have actually an awakening of a midah, not just kiruv, but you actually have awakening of a feeling of love that brings that you identify with the thing that you love, the love of life, basically the life that comes from this place. Then comes the third meditation. I said, the first when I counted 1 and 2, which was this bonus close, bonus prat, is in general 1, but there are two steps in that first one. Savas Hayesh in general, and then the details of what kind of ayin that is. That only brings kiruv. What we spoke now brings ava, because it's connection to the chayes within existence, within us. Then comes after, he says, a long period of exerting yourself and working on this over a period of time, and this second contemplation becomes integrated in you. You come to realize that all this chayes is only a reflection of atzmus. It's only an amida, baruch sha'amar. It's just one utterance. So it's completely infinitely distant. So therefore now, why would you want to have something that is only a reflection? You want to have the source itself. So now begins the hunger, the longing for atzmus. And then finally, the fourth is banus, is actually the haflaw of atzmus itself. And what does this bring? 1 second. No, that's the fourth. The third one, he doesn't actually say what midah it brings. Rotzi, take off rotzi lichul, or to draw it down. I guess it's definitely still in the area of Ahava, probably. And then comes the fourth, where you're actually contemplating. Again, in a way, it's almost like from Shlili you go to Chiyuv. First, you contemplate that the ayin is not the yesh, and you realize that it's far superior, and you feel close to that. Then you come to realize that it's giving you life. In other words, it's internal, and you can relate to it. So that's ava. Then you come to realize the ha'ara is shalei berach. It's almost like shtaim shem arba in a way. And atzmus is what you want. And then you come to contemplate what atzmus is itself, and that brings yirah ilah. An awe, a sense of awe that atzmus, what kind of atzmus, how awesome atzmus must be. So though there's the fourth one, he doesn't say Baruch Shamar actually. The fourth one he doesn't say. He says the third one, but fourth he doesn't say it. I mean, I'm sure you can find it in Baruch Shamar and everything, and then this awe, he says, and then he distinguishes between Yirah Tata, Yirah Ilah. Yirah Tata is the first contemplation, where you're thinking, that God, that the Ayin of the Key created. That power of creation is also evokes awe. But it's more from a distance, so it's a Yirah Tata. It's more like you acknowledge something. Now we're talking about something you clearly are meditating and contemplating. Once it goes through all those other 3 levels, clearly you're far more evolved, so your awe and respect is going to be far deeper. So he doesn't really explain what Yirah Ilah is, but clearly it's a Yirah Pnimi Yeser. realizing that God is beyond Ma'ila Mata, and therefore He's below just as much as He's above. Okay. But again, he didn't tie this yet together with. It all began. This was all in Aveda. Yuvan Zeb Aveda Hashem. How Hizbonenus brings to Meichen brings to Midas. But now he's going to bring it back.
It's interesting because I think in other places it speaks about the order of Ava in Europe. You know, the same order.
In Tanya, well, usually you say Ava Zuta, Yira Tata, Yira Elon, and Ava Rabba. A few different ways you can order it. There's something Ava, Yira, Ava.
Actually, when we did this, that Yira Tator comes first, and then.
No, for sure Yira Tator comes first, but I'm saying from the bottom up. Yeah. There's the lower Ava, there's the lower Yira, there's the higher Yira and the higher Ava. Sometimes like that. I think that's the way it's in Tanya, if I recall. There's different orders. It all depends. The basic thing with Ava and Yira, which is very important, that people, again, it's just words. What is Ava? We took Ava Yira. Ava is a sense of closeness and intimacy, and Yira is a sense of distance and awe. The key, the bottom line. That's the key thing. That's really, sometimes Ava doesn't just mean you like. Most things we like are very physical things. So Ava is a sense of understanding, relating to God, and Yira is actually telling you don't relate to Him, but not in a bad way. The distance, as in being like the bittul that's necessary. Yira is bittul and Ava is integration. If you only had Yira without Ava, you'd only have the distance, like Seviv. If you have Ava without Yira, you only have within you. It's again the interface. Yira is a direct outgrowth of Yesh Ma'ayin. When you realize something is Yesh Ma'ayin, the distance tells you, wow. So Atzilus says being Gilei Helim is much more evokes an element of Ava. It's like Ben and Eved in Samach Vov. A Ben is Ava. An Eved is Yira. Imosei Elecha. An Eved is not. Now, if an Eved also loves his master, fine. So that's a Ben Shanasa Eved Shanasa Ben, or Ben Shanasa Eved, or however. Yeah. But the point is that you need both in the whole structure of things. A Loisa is a more of a Yira thing. You stay away from something. A Mitzvah is you bring it into you.
We start off with the first step. Is a kiruv. So that seems like an ava when somebody is kiruv.
It is. But he doesn't call it midah of ava. He says it's just a general sense of closeness. We said you can't love something that you don't understand, basically.
And we call it yira. But
he doesn't call it. I mean, why? How is it consistent with what he said at the end? I guess it also has another element. Has two sides to it. He didn't say actually that he's referring to the first contemplation. I said that. It sounds like it because he says Yesh Gam Ki Yir Habam is Bonus Bebrius Havas Elements. What is that? That's the first level. So I guess basically I would say very simple. The first contemplation brings the element of kiruv and also brings the element of yira. It's not a contradiction. Kiruv is like you said. What is kiruv? But it's a good point you're making. Very good point. Kiruv alakuzin chikim ebachutz.
He doesn't even allude to the fact that there might be if it did bring a midah, it would have been Ava. He doesn't say anything about Ava in the first.
No, for sure not. But then at the end, when he says his bonus and Savas brings Yira, what's his bonus is he talking about? There must be the step one. There's nowhere else. So when he says Yira there, he means there's a sense of what he just wants to distinguish. Look, Ava and Yira. In the context that he's discussing here, is a relationship. So when you still have the ayin and the yesh, though there's a relationship, but it's richuk, it's a distance because it's like a creator and a creature. So there's a sense of closeness to it, but it still remains something beyond you. When you're talking level 2 here, he's talking far more. You're contemplating it's like a guf wanting a nefesh. Your body wants health. That's not just awe. That's actually closeness. You want your nefesh to be bound with your body, and there should be a very close relationship. So it's far more like pnimis. That's why it's chikim befnim. That's why it's like chiseling from within. They said if you stay with the yira, it remains kabbalah seldik, a much more of a distance and not a personal relationship. You need both. That's the bottom line. But the good point you made there. So there is the first one. I would say both a kiruv and this element of yira.
Why can't you say this both at the same time? One is to the ayin and the key that's being mechaya, and one is to the far greater.
Yeah. You could say that. You could. Yeah. to Kuf Nun Aleph, 151, page 296. Now in all the way methods of Aveda, of the service above, Shem His Bonus, Nasi Seder Samidis, because all of them, that's about how his bonus, how contemplation brings an awakening, an arousal of feelings and emotions. Harimasha Meir Ba'amidis, in all the levels, what is radiating, what illuminates in the midas, what shines in them, it's not from the core intelligence of the contemplation. Because Meichen Be'etzem, he's going back now to Yisrael Saba and Tefina Meichen Be'etzem. Remember Abi Ema Tatoin Elaine, going back to that idea. Which before the Ilavol, I just want to see what was the last time he spoke about that. One second. Yeah. Shlomo was still the Seichel of that Shaykhus to Midas, and then there's Meichen Be'etzem. Okay. The Matan Teir, basically, Meichen Be'etzem. Not Meichen as it applies to application. She says, all these contemplations, all these Aveda we spoke, is all connected to Midas. Because Atzmus HaMeichen is just pure comprehension. The Verstand from the Minyan. Understanding of the idea. Not what it awakens. Ushayunacha Inyan hated b'meichen. And so sich gut oplegen darin. That this idea should also be well absorbed, well absorbed, integrated, internalized. That not just you understand it, but you really mastered it, like it really resonates. Maybe hanocha here. But basically, Verstand and hanocha, that you understand it and that it's settled inside of you. Yeah, settled. So this is a seichel. That's etzemech. We're not even mentioning midas there. So lezet tzarich leider ha'adonis ha'inyanim pratim shebehem yovin es ha'inyan eliki. In order for it to understand it and for that to become settled and absorbed inside of you, you need to know the Hakdamas. You need to know the Hakdamas literally means in prefaces and introduction, but it means Hakdamas means the whole so-called Ishtel. You say Hakdamas sometimes you mean the whole breadth, the breadth of the concept. Va'inyanim pratim and the detail shebehem in them. Shebehem Yovin es ha'inyan eliki. Because through these Hakdamas and through the details, that's how you understand this divine concept. So all four things we spoke about. We discussed how they affect a person. But Me'etzem HaMeichen is not how they affect, but the actual comprehension and appreciation of the idea. The tzorich is hergish al the is bonus. One second, what does it say? Is it qualified? Yeah, he's basically making a case how this is removed, a step removed from the actual application of feelings. So that's what first thing he says. And now he's going further. Also, there has to be a head of Shalaki, which is still midas shabameichen. We're not talking about meichen shabamidas, in other words. And there also has to be a head of Shalaki. That means you should also have a sense, a feeling, a sense. In the intellectual process, you sense the divine, his bonus, in the contemplation. Hein betchilas, his bonus, both in the beginning of the contemplation. You need to have an inclination and a general awareness that you're talking about a divine thing. So let's go back. You're saying the yes can't create itself. I'm just using an example, and it has to come from an ayin. So right there, you have to have a sense in this ayin. You have to sense that there's something. It's almost like an intuition, intellectual intuition, that there's something here that's divine, that's sublime, essentially. Like similar to what it says in Tanya, in the parentheses, this is about learning Torah. Shekedem halimud, before you begin learning, you have to contemplate, meditate that this is divine, this is divine wisdom and will. which was when we Baruch B'Torah Tchila. It's like making the bracha. So before you're not just learning. In other words, he's saying part of his bonus is also the acknowledgement that you're dealing with something that is divine. That's not, in other words, that's not midas. That's not the result of the contemplation, how it affects you. That is a part of like Deishus Chacham Yiras Hashem. That's part of the process of contemplating on this idea. It's a critical point because he wants to say that this is all the Hergish and the Meichen. It's not how the effects that it has, the Ava, the Kiru, the Yira, and everything that we spoke about. Because this is going back now to how Meichen affects midas, how Meichen is on its own. This is what this whole thing is leading to. Yeah. Because if you remember, that's Atzilus to itself or something.
We can look at the class here. It says here, with so being
Very good. Very good. Very good. Hold on a second. So Meichen and midas, you see, midas is a different personality than Meichen. That's why Atzilus to Biyah is a different world. So that's what he wants to make a case. He's making a real strong case here, how Meichen and midas and Aveda. This is all in Aveda, what he spoke earlier, how Meichen to itself is not, remember he said it's not, there's no Hergish Atzmei, and there's no Ispilus. There's no subjective sense of self, and there's no excitement, like emotional excitement. So then he spoke in Aveda, so he's saying now he's tying up the end of it. That there's two parts to this abundance. Everything we spoke is already how it's applying to midas. But that's how Atzilus speaks to Biyah. How is Atzilus to itself, Meichen to itself? That is what he's spoken about now. Contemplation. So he said two things in contemplation itself: comprehending and Legenzach, which is the absorption, the settling. And then he says you need a Hergish. Now he's saying in Hergish also two things. The beginning you need a Hergish to know that you're talking about something divine, like he said with Teda. The same thing in the contemplation. Like he says in Tanya, before you start learning, you need to know it's a divine wisdom and will. Same thing here. You need to know when you start, before you contemplate, you have to know it's divine. But here, he's making a distinction. He's qualifying. Actually, this bonus, it's yediyah b'chala, but tzarich lisnatiyas v'nesinus nafsheh l'zeh. In other words, there it's a little more detailed. God gave the Torah. Here it's just a general awareness that it's a divine thing.
Why is he calling it the Hergish Eloki?
Because it's midas Meichen. It's a Hergish. Not just because this is not about understanding. This is about sensing. It's like a sensing that this is
the
something.
whole process of understanding is to get you to the level.
That's not what he's talking about now. It's the same exact opposite.
That's why.
We discussed this with chapters. There's Meichen. Meichen is trying to contemplate and understand something. I just told you two key distinctions. Midas it's negated to me. In Meichen, there's nothing here that's about me. Even this Hergish is not about me.
This is not me.
Not you. That's God. It's not what's in it for me. A midah means its impact on me. It's an application. This is not application. This is on the contrary. I would say it's the other way around. It's going away from you. It's saying it's not about you. It's about God. Let me put it to you this way. Yeah, if you don't understand the difference between Meichen and midas, it's not a surprise, but this is the key difference. Meichen has nothing to do with individual interest. Any subjectivity, no subjectivity is negiyah, is outside the domain of Meichen. As soon as intelligence is affected by a bias, it's already not intelligence. It's being affected by an interest. That's what means objectivity. That's why sheikhid, a judge or anyone who has any interest, cannot judge. You see this problem all the time. Without mentioning names, I see so many battles going on, and I always, if someone brings me involved, the first thing I do is I passel everybody because you're negated though. They never say that. Everyone's making arguments and arguments. Let's establish what's within the rule in any court, in the legal system. If you're in a Geved, you're puzzled. You can't. So just a few days ago, there were two guys that had a big fight, financial. They're both giving me a case in this. So I said, "One second, but your argument is based because you're really defending your father's business, and your son." She said, "But I'm not in my father's business." I said, "But one second, could you be a witness at your father's something that your father's legally doing?" You wouldn't even put yourself as a witness, right? Because a witness can't be in the Geved though. You can't have a witness. That's a relative. So what are you telling me? It doesn't matter whether you're in the business or not. He's your father. Most problems, many problems, again, people are not ready to acknowledge. People would say, you know what, I'm in a Geved, but I still want to make a case. Fine. So you at least expose. You have to full transparency. Seichel, pure seichel, has nothing to do, cannot have self-interest involved. If self-interest, it has to bias the idea.
I still don't understand what
The pasuk, you're shaking it.
hergish means in this
Yeah,
context.
that's why.
I still don't understand.
But don't get trapped in the word hergish. Hergish means, midas hergish means what's in it for me. Where's hergish here to do with me?
The question is, what
Hergish Elokim, nothing to do with me.
why do you have to know Elokim? We're just dealing with Seichel.
Okay, you read from Tanya because you have to know what you're talking. If I was telling you now, I was going to talk to you how to cook, and you think it's physics, you're going to have a problem in understanding the cooking. You need to enter into something. You need to know that this is something that is of divine, that is of a different quality. You're not talking about something that's material.
It's not subjective.
What is the subjective? It's a purely intellectual awareness that this is of a different. It's like saying this is physics and not accounting.
You're getting the perspective. How to put what we're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You need to have a hergish Elokim based bonus, hein betchila, in the beginning. I will tell you there's natias in the sinas nafshel lezeh. It's actually the opposite. It's not about application. It's going to the thing and understanding it on its terms, not on your terms.
No, going down to something, so to speak.
That includes. But that's what midas shebemichmeh. But achar that's one, and then you need another hergish, another place where this hergish applies. But achar be'eseis bonus, that's before. During the contemplation, he needs to sense. He needs to sense the divine in it. Loirak hasoga levad, meaning not just pure academic contemplation. Now, look, let's dissect the process of the intellectual process. You could say there's three things he said here. You can understand something and it's not internalized. It doesn't leizach. You can say I get it, but I don't really get it. The best proof is you probably couldn't repeat it. Then comes step two. You could actually yunach became absorbed and you could repeat it.
Comes yours.
Right? And then there's a third thing. You actually have a sensation. You sense it. There's a certain intuition of that is deeper than just the second step. How do I explain it? There's different ways. I mean, you have to have the experience. You can't talk about it academically.
One way you would say, I heard, the other way you would say it on your own.
Well, that's number two, but the question is what's three?
Yeah. No, that's I'm saying that if I can repeat it, I can say I heard from somebody. But when I can say it in my name, then I've got to feel it.
I don't know if that's not necessarily. I think you could have number two and repeat it well. Hergish is almost das. Chachma bina das. Chachma bina, understanding well. Bina can have hanocha. We learned that. Hanocha. Das, what's das? How do you always understand? What does das add to chachma bina? That's hagosh. But it's in meichel. Resonance, but resonance is very similar to hanocha.
You really identify with it.
And Tanya calls it iskashus, like the yoda. It's an intimacy. It's an intimate element. It's far deeper than just plain integration and hanocha. Well, before these bandus, clearly he says that's like just being aware. During these bandus, what he's saying now is it's this dimension of it. It doesn't call it das here, but it's very similar to das. The hergish is. I mean, I can only by passive, but it's not it's not the hergish. What's in it for me and what is it doing for me, or applying it. It's a hergish in the seichel. You're sensing and feeling the seichel. It needs more explanation how you distinguish that from hanocha. But he does say so look for it in other places that may elaborate more. I'll get back to it if I find it. I need more issues. I don't have them right now. I mean, I sense it. I have the hergish, but I don't have the words. So I have the third, but not the first.
You just gave the best example.
Yeah, it's true. It's one of the things. Das is like the example with the reading of the letter, where the guy faints and the one who's reading doesn't faint. So the one who's reading understands better the letter. He knows how to read, but it's not negated. But there's not a good example because they're talking negated to you personally. That's not a good example. No, that's not a good example. Now, hergish is as a writer, I can tell you, sometimes I feel something, sense it, and I can't put it in words until you get it in words. And then when you get it in words, you ever read something and you get it so clearly, and it's like amazes you. It's like such a deep clarity. But it's more than hanoch. It has to be more than hanoch. The interesting thing here is also he's saying Hergish Aleki. So it's not just the Hergish. It's not like you're not talking about physics. Hergish Aleki, so
the hay in there too.
yeah. So it could be that here he's adding not just that you sense, like in other words, everything you could say, the physics too, or any science you can say there's step one you understand, step two that it relates, that it settles and absorbs. So Hergish Aleki means that it's almost like having an intuition of what God is like. That's what it comes down to. It's not just understanding. It's almost like an intelligent intuition of what the personality of this ayin is like. Yeah, I mean, if you close your eyes and you thought of how matter came into being, yesh came from an ayin. So there's this philosophy of it. A yesh can't make a yesh endlessly, so you know it has to have so-called an architect. But then when you start thinking of the personality of the architect, we're not talking about Na'amidus yet. You have a sense that this ayin is something that's completely different. No more the philosophy of it. It's not just the mathematics of it. It's the Hergish of it. That's the Hergish. It's almost having it's an intellectually emotional reaction. But then he continues. Aval Makom Mokim has a hasoga. Nevertheless, even though it's a Hergish, it's a comprehension. It's a comprehension. Leida ulahasig is an Indian hater. To know and to appreciate and to comprehend this idea well. The whole Indian hasoga ain't made by midah. The whole hasoga, the whole contemplation does not radiate, does not shine into the midah, into the emotion. Rag b'chinas makif, kemerachif nomayla. Only in a form of makif, like merachif, which means it hovers. It hovers from above. Because once you have the feeling, now let us say this. Let me go back to one of the examples used in the previous chapter. Remember, he gave the example of the psari Evza from my flesh. He said, just like a nefesh, right? When you're weak or debilitated, or in general, you have a longing for the energy of your soul. You want to draw it. You have a longing for it. That's an emotional reaction, the longing. But before that, you understand that this nefesh is your source of life, right? Because you're not. The body does not give itself life. It comes from this fountain, so to speak. So you begin to contemplate on the nature of this fountain, and you say, I want this. Before the want, there's an understanding, and you get a sense. What is your nefesh like? Someone asked you, what is your soul like? So you can give an intellectual explanation. The soul is energy. The soul is sublime. The soul is abstract. The soul doesn't occupy time and space. You can go into the whole thing, right? But then someone will say, you can tell me, and then you come to a point, you sense you have a soul. That's a hergish that you have a soul. We're not talking now yet the application of what it does for you, that you long for it. But you have a sensation. You know what I'm talking about because you have a soul. I don't need many words. So what is the sense? Someone says to you, now imagine you're sitting at this table right now, someone that's not alive. I mean dead. Someone that doesn't know what life is, and not neshama b'guf. Let's say some other type of creature doesn't have neshama. I mean, I can't. It's an imaginary thing. And he says to you, can you tell me what does life feel like? Explain. Explain to me what life is like. So you say, well, let me explain to you. See electricity, like in a light bulb, electricity enters the light bulb. Okay. It's a concept. Nice. But there's going to be something missing because he doesn't have it. He doesn't have a soul. So it's like the blind person trying to explain colors. There's a hergish that we all have. When I say soul in your body, you know what I'm talking about. You know what means life. It doesn't necessarily have a sensation, but it's being alive. And I'm here. I sense I'm here. This has nothing to do yet with its application that you want life and that you want to draw this and long for it because you want more strength or more energy. This is a contemplation that has led also to hergish. That's how I would. One example of explaining. She says this hasoga does not come into the midah. The midah, once you start saying, I long for life, now you're focusing on a hergish. Now you're focusing what you want from it. It's like when you do research, research is independent and detached from the conclusions. You do research, you're in the middle of research. Someone say to you, what's your conclusion? I have no conclusion at this point. I'm researching it. I have here, you have any leanings? I have leanings this way, I have leanings that way. At this point, everything is possible. There's a stage like that. And it's supposed to be that way. And then when you come to a point where you're ready to have an application, you say, I've come to a conclusion. And now there's an application, not only a conclusion, you've ruled. And people are now are doing something based on your ruling. In this midah, the subject is not made. Like he said all the way in the beginning, remember we said in Shulchan Aruch, you only have the halacha b'poel, you may have a reason given there. But what's radiating, what dominates there, is not reason. What dominates now is application. You see this all the time, let's say in business even. The people who are the brains behind the business, they come up with a concept, an idea. Then they build an app. They build a technology. The technology is now being sold. The people who are selling, and the people who are buying, and the people who are even in the business itself, and busy in marketing, what they're focusing on is application. This is how we do it. You may, if you want, you open up a manual, you can go and start discovering some of the reasoning behind it. But what dominates there is application, not the reasoning behind it. The Idrgis, on the other hand, when you're in the middle of the reasoning, what dominates is only the reasoning. Including the hergish, the aha moment, perhaps is also the hergish of the key, like you say, the aha of it. So he says that's not radiating into the midah. Rak b'chinas makif, in the form of makif, yeah, of course, it hovers over it because the whole application is guided by, is governed, directed by the reasoning. He's really walking you through the process of how a healthy mind is supposed to function, how it's supposed to lead to feelings. Why is this complicated for us? Because we are basically a bundle of emotions. We're governed by emotions primarily, and even our intelligence is very biased very often. But this is not. But the intelligent person knows that the process works this way. And I always say regarding to all the controversial topics, like you name any topic, Mashiach is controversial. You have topics like emotional topics that affect people, hot button issues that are controversial, how to deal with gay people. You're going to see these areas is where people violate this principles at most. Their emotions are governing their mind. And that's why there's no communication. Because you can't have intelligent communication when everybody has feelings, and partisan feelings. And there's no real intelligent discussion. And it's not that easy. Why? Because we already have biases, we already have strong feelings, and we're immersed. Which is why I always say, in this type of situations, that's why we have a Torah, thank God. And that we don't do things, or we don't have philosophies based on Hergesh. Not because you have a Hergesh. It's based on a Shulchan Aruch, based on a Torah that says, it has sources. This is what the Torah says. Understand what it says. I'll present you my sources. You have different sources? Okay. Let's talk about it not personally. It's not about you and me. What do the sources say? Talk about the sources without any personal bias. Then, let's go and see what that brings, what conclusions do we come to. If you do that, guaranteed you can diffuse, I would say, every argument. Now, people are smart. They hide their arguments. They hide their biases in intellectual arguments. They play mind games. They don't tell you that they have a bias. They say, no. We deal with this all the time. People hiding behind their minds. Because it's a convenient way of not dealing with something that's vulnerable or something you're not so sure about, etc. So people have great minds. They cover their tracks well. The smarter the person, the more screwed up they can be because of this reason. Because their mind is now being used. He says this in Tanya, Perek Tes, one of the most brilliant chapters, just in human psychology, is a moich and a lev, a mind and a heart. Just like the blood of the heart runs to the brain, literally physically, to nourish it, also emotions from the heart run to the brain and causes you to think differently. It'll change the way you think. This is what's called Sheikhet Ya'aver Ein Chacham. Simple as that. And no one is immune. Not Moshe Rabbeinu, and not the simplest person. No one is immune. There's no such thing as someone that's the Adam Karavetz or Atzmei, the Klal, the person who's close to himself, biased. This doesn't mean that you can get around it. You get around it by acknowledging it, and by two, going to someone who's not biased to help you resolve something that you can't really answer. But this is the blind spots. When someone tells me, I say, you have any blind spots? Yes, but I know what they are. You ever hear that one? Then it's not a blind spot if you know what they are. That's the whole point of a blind spot. You don't know what they are. And this is a key. And we're all guilty of this. But when you think about it, it makes total sense. How are you going to get to the clarity of something? Now, of course, there's those that argue that even the mind is just biased, and so on. I'm not getting that. But the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says, Me'ech Shal Talalev. You could look at something for fresh eyes and come away with an objective perspective if you choose to do so. Like he says in Tanya, the Teva tells us that a person could be Me'ech Shal Talalev. It's a fundamental principle. It's not acquired. It's an innate nature that a person has that ability. Now, that we exercise it is another story. We don't usually. But that we could, absolutely. Look, a very close kasha in Tanya is like this. Later in Perikid Gimel, he says, Perikid Beis, Yudalit, he says, Zev Shelton. Okay, so you have two judges. The Eitz gives its opinion, Nefshel Kis, Nefshel Bamis. And then it says, that God stands on your right side, so it's 2 against 1, and you win. So, of course, the Klotz Kasha is hard, so why are we always losing if it's 2 against 1? Simple question. The answer is very simple. Let's go back to the former Soviet Union, you have your answer. It's a kangaroo court. If you only let the prosecutor speak, and you never give equal time for your mind, and never shall kiss to speak, so obviously it's going to be 1 against 0. God can only come, the third judge can only come in if you give the second judge equal time. What happens is that a taiva gets you at the moment. It doesn't give you time to reflect. Look at most taivas. If you reflected overnight, most taivas would not be acted on. It's the moment of passion. You say, right now, So you don't say, okay, I heard my Yetzer Hara speak, I'm going to give equal time to my Yetzer Tov, let's hear the case, and then guaranteed that the third judge will take the side, obviously, because you'll have the power to overcome the temptation. The problem is temptations work impulsively. That's the whole power of emotions, is that it doesn't wait. If we waited, then it's not an emotion anymore. If your mind was strong enough to say to the emotion, listen, I hear what you're saying, I understand, I know this type is very powerful, but I want to now hear another opinion. Tell me how many mistakes would be avoided if we were able to do that. It doesn't work that way. Most mistakes happen like that. It's like the telemarketer says, if you don't buy it now, the deal is off. It's all emotional manipulation. Because if you thought about it, you went home to think about it, say, this is a shmata, what do I need this for? It's so poshut, but at the same time it shows us how insane we are, because we could know this and still make the same mistake again. Now I'm just trying to point out that you spell it out, it's very clear that there's levels, there's reasoning, hasogya. So he's saying that even though the contemplation brings an application, but you have to distinguish it. When it's contemplation time, it's contemplation time. And then that's what he's saying. So therefore, it's the whole inyan hasogya ain't meir ba'amida. Hasogya is not meir in the middle. Once you're in application, now it's only hovers above it. What's the word for it? It informs the application. It informs the midah, the hendish, the feeling. But it's not the feeling. Now the feeling is the. What happened? I hope this catches right, even if it's on the floor. It's very strong one. Sorry. These delicate things are like.
How do you get that original Harry Shalaki, the one from before the translation?
I'm busy with connecting my mic. I can't chew gum while I walk.
What?
How do you what? What's your question?
There's also a Harry Shalaki that comes before this, right? Unless you can start.
Yeah, that's just the introduction, like he says. But before you start, you need to know you're dealing here with something that is of a different quality, etc. Okay. Now he's giving an example. Like the contemplation, and this is going back, he's referring to something we learned before in the last chapter. When you're contemplating on the Eir and Chayes, the energy and life force, divine life force, Shebe'elim is in the world, in existence. Hari Mashameir Ba'amida, what shines, what flows, Meir is illuminates. Mashameir, Meir is a very, it doesn't very penetrates. What enters into the midah is only that there is an eir v'chayis aliki, that there is a life force, an energy divine in every creature. Usha'ikeru alakus, and that is the primary element in this entity, alakus. Not the yesh, but the alakus in it. The hand, not the glove. That's what enters into the midah. Aval hechrachis hadavar. But the compelling evidence, or the case made for it, hechrachis means what compels us to say that. How is hechrachis hadavar? Yeah, what compels us? I'm talking about intellectually. What intellectually compels us? Sheyesh b'hem chayis aliki, u'sha'chayis hu alakus. That they have divine life, and that this life force is divine, means that they have life, and that this life is divine. And how without that life force it would all become nothingness, it would all disappear. This is the intelligent contemplation behind it, in it. That does not illuminate, that does not radiate, does not penetrate into the feeling at all. One second. Only, as I said before, hovering, merachiv. Only in a makivdik way. The 2 points is that there is a life force within, and that this life force is divine. Or before he said that the divine as the ikr. The ikr is the divine life force. The ikr is alakus. That's what I'm going to explain now. That's what he just, that's what he's saying now. The midah gets that there is, let's go back, he said, we feel that we have a soul, and the midah therefore wants to have this life of the soul. We want to have energy, especially when you feel weak, like he said. When a person feels weak, you want energy. That's a midah. So the midah gets that it's like, I want to use an example, it's like the dog knows its owner. But the dog doesn't understand its owner. It knows that this is a life force. It knows the result of the contemplation. But the hechrachis that led you to come to that. Like if you ask the midah, tell me, how do you know that this is your life force? It says, I don't know how I know, I just know it is. Because it's a product of it's like I said before, someone who's busy with the production, the manufacturing of a product, can tell you everything what I need to know to do. But they can't necessarily tell you the science behind it. The science it doesn't have. That's how I would put it. I mean, using that example. The science that led you to understand, like he says,
the engineer does know physics.
and also, like you'll ask the midah, because the midah is focused on self-interest. Doesn't really care actually. And it's not. Remember, a midah is not a seichel. Midah does not comprehend. Midah acts. Midah feels, you can say, and then acts on that feeling. Midah is drawn to things. That would be the best word. Attracted and repelled. That's the classic inyan of a midah. So it's impulsive. It's not reflective. That's the foundation of a midah. If you remember, you go back to the end of chapter 149. He says 2 key things between midah and meichin. He says a midah is hergish atzmei, self-interest, feeling yourself, and 2 there's ispilus. And meichin both are the opposite. Meichin is no hergish atzmei. As a matter of fact, feeling yourself is mavalbal. Disturbs your being able to think about it objectively, and ispilus disturbs it. The end of the chapter. That's how he led into this whole Aveda. This is where he's tying it back. So what we learned before in the last chapter was what the Izbanus leads to. Now in this chapter he's dissecting the Izbanus and the Midas, the Meichin and the Midas. Look, you have to dissect it because at the end of the day, this is definitely an abstract dissection because there's almost nothing in life where you can find one without the other. Because anything we do has an information that informs, and you have what you're doing. And by us, it's just one big jumble. We don't even think about it too much. But if you really want to think about the scientific process, this is the process. There are steps. Now, in most cases, most people don't go through that. That's why I said the other day, hisbonenus means you're deliberately sitting down. I'm not going to think about myself, and I'm thinking about God. This is not an accident. It's not like, it's not spontaneous. It's a deliberate act of sitting down to daven. Right, and this bonus is a step, and then that bonus leads to midas. The reason it's a little foreign is because we don't work that way. We're not that disciplined. We're simply not that. We don't. We're not trained to think like this. We think like this maybe in our so-called scientific side of us. You research, and then you act. But when it comes to personal life, how many people think like that? People are completely subjective. I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. I'm not going to go now and study whether I should be eating or et cetera, or life purpose. Why am I here? We work by necessity, by the survival of the fittest, with whatever the moment demands. Obviously, this is a disciplined life. This is a disciplined person. So it is in these steps. But it makes total sense when you think about it. And we do have examples of it. I mean, anyone who's ever done research understands this in a moment. Research is a perfect example. Research should never be... It's like a brainstorm session. Brainstorm sessions are not about conclusions. They're about, I want to hear everybody's thoughts, and we don't care what direction it goes. Then there's a meeting of how to do it. Then that meeting is not for brainstorming. We're not now brainstorming. Now we're talking about we chose one approach and we're going to figure out how to do it. You'll see many people who are like amateurs who don't know how to run meetings make this mistake. They think they turn implementation meetings into brainstorms and brainstorms into implementation. They're not the same thing. A brainstorm is literally meant to be exactly that. We're brainstorming, no holds barred. If money was not an object, if money was not a problem, what would we do? Dream away. And then that opens up those doors. Then comes a stage, we made a decision, whatever, based on pros and cons and weighing it back and forth, and now we're doing it. Now someone brings up in the next stage, we missed something, okay, fine, so you go back to the drawing board. But that's the normal process. The thing is, in personal life, and especially in our spiritual life, that requires this is what Chassidus does. Midas, meichin, midas, hisbonenus, midas. It's really, this is these chapters are really practical in that sense. He's not talking now. Even though he's talking the concept of Atzilus and Biyah, and we're going to get back to that, but this really brings it home, because this is something anyone can relate to.
This is a good example of how drug companies is mushing it, and how drug companies trying to see if a product is worth going into. They have to be completely objective. The guy who thought of the product is never going to be objective. The drug company has to put the money up.
The problem is money is what drives those companies today. So money right away biases.
Your bias is that way.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter to them.
Look, any discussion, any thoughtful discussion about capitalism, about economics, about government, always addressed, the thinkers always address this issue. How do you balance self-interest and the greater good? The fact is people have self-interest. So the Marxist approach was very much, you don't trust people, and you just trust a few individuals. Why you trust them is another story, but the bottom line is, because you can't trust people, and people will abuse each other. All that critique of capitalism. Capitalism's approach is self-interest should be the driving force because you can't eliminate that. Profit and greed and so on. You got to, but there's the marketplace correction, so to speak. Checks and balances. People need each other. Coexistence. All the different theories behind it. Regulation. But everyone knows it's very fragile. Look at our. It's based on what? And what happens if the regulators get corrupt? Then what do you do? And what happens if who writes the laws? Etc., etc. We all know it's a subjective system. But like Churchill said, it's the worst system, but he's never found a better one. So under human circumstances, I've written about this extensively. It's applying these ideas of how do you balance self-interest and greater good. That's the bottom line. Yeah. So I just last week I started something. I wrote it a while ago, but yeah. It's a very fundamental topic, but it addresses everything. Look, it all comes down to, obviously, the Yisod of Yesodis is if you go with Richard Dawkins' approach, that the selfish gene, that we're just selfish creatures because of the natural selection and the whole that process, then all this is the whole assumption is different. That assumption is then dog eats dog, survival of the fittest, and the only reason we get along is because if I kill you, you can kill me. So we have to have green lights and red lights, but it's completely subjective. It's arbitrary.
It's social
Right? It's an arbitrary social contract that has no basis on anything absolute. Torah is based, obviously, that there's purpose and design and God's a plan, and we have Me'ach Shalat Ala Lev. We're not inherent animals.
Yeah.
We're not beasts. We have the ability to control ourselves. We have the ability to harness our self-interest. And that's critical. That's the whole basis of Torah. We're created in the image of God. We're not created as selfish creatures. Period. We have a selfish side, but you have another side that counters it.
So Avraham Avinu went through this
100%.
Probably more than anything.
That's why that's why I think actually. Remember, he said you can't get to the other abundance till you get to the first. You go through this. My sense of this, Hergish Alaki in this is that you can't get to Matan Torah without going through the Avos. That's why Matan Torah didn't happen by Brias Elam, the creation. You can't get to a higher dimension of divine if you don't go through this process of your subjectivity being refined and understanding itself, because it'll always come back to haunt you. If someone gives you a divine revelation of Atzmus, what happens to yourself? Either it gets annihilated, or it's just waiting, it's lurking and waiting to appear. So you have to go through a process of pashat refinement of your basic basic instincts, base instincts, in order to get there in a lasting way. I'm not talking about for a moment everyone has an epiphany or a revelation. We're talking about a lasting, sustainable way. You have to deal with your Yetzer Hara. There's no question, there's no way around it. It's part of you. When I say Yetzer Hara, I mean your selfish side, your narcissistic side, your self-interest, your midas. I mean, he said it before. Remember the beginning of the chapter was also a great line there that he said. I mean, they're all great lines, but this one just jumped out at me. He said, why do you need midas? Why do you need to be ma'ir yelev aviyir? He says, who hazichach ubir rachumen is the nefesh habamas v'tikun kol ha'inyanim. Because without it, if you don't have a love and awe for something holy, who's controlling your midas? Your materialism, matter. Simple as that. It's not going to stay around quiet. You have to fill the void because you have midas. So they're either going to like Gashmis or they're going to like Ruchnis. So if you don't work with that, this is the basis. In the beginning you always ask me, how do you know Chassidus? So I said the mitzvah of a Yedaita, to know God, the mitzvah of Ahavta compels us that it's not just serving God with Kabbalah Sel. He wants you to. First of all, there's the mitzvah of it, and then there's the logic of it. There's the logic. I always tell this to a lot of people who, from Jews who say, "Who says you just got to do what God wants?" So there's two arguments against. Number one, the Torah itself does not say that. Yeah, Maiso Iker, all that fine. Nasma Nishma, but it says V'haftas Hashem Lekechas. It's a fundamental mitzvah. So it's one of the biggest mitzvahs, maybe the biggest. V'haftas Recha Kamecha, Yiras Hashem, Amuna, Yedias Hashem, V'yadaita. What do you do with all that? And two, the logic. What are you going to do with your mind and your heart if you're going to just give your action to God? Where's it going to go? It's not going to just sit around. It's going to go the wrong places. So what are you going to do with that? And it's going to come back to affect your mindset at the end of the day. How could it not? Because if you have a passion for something that's inappropriate, what do you think is going to happen? Your passion just remain passionate. You're just going to be Kabbalah Selnik. Yeah, sometimes that works, but not always. It's a fundamental principle. This whole that's why it has to come. That's what he's really doing here. He's taking the whole Atzilus and Biyah and putting this Atzilus for Atzilus is Meichen, and Atzilus for Biyah is Meichen applied. Midas. That's what he's really saying here. Everything we learned in us is these two steps: the reasoning behind it and the application. But we are creatures of application. We're creatures of habit. We're behavioral. We live in a world where our interests absolutely affect us, and our emotions affect us, and things. Chassidus is here to
so who makes a decision?
Help us battle.
The question on table is if you have two opposing forces, each one is pulling you in another direction, who makes a decision?
Okay. So sometimes they say Nefesh HaSichlis. They have Seichel. Nefesh HaBamis is here, Nefesh HaLakis is here. Seichel.
Yeah.
We also nefesh hasichlis is the ultimate so-called arbiter. It's a classic question. Who's the who? The better question you have to ask is who is who? Before you ask me who makes decisions, tell me who's who. Who Who are you?
Right.
Who are you?
A couple days.
Who are you?
Only a couple days.
It's not so simple.
It's Nefesh Bahamis
I know.
doing everything.
Fundamental question.
Well, look, what's his name said that I am who I think, therefore I am. Who was that? That was Descartes, right? Descartes. And there's different takes on it.
Nefesh Sichlis, I think, is brought on maybe once in Tanya.
It's not brought at all in Tanya.
Right.
As a matter of fact, Likutei Torah, he says it's not brought in Tanya.
Right.
It's a third nefesh. In a Chanami, in Tanya, you can't really come to a conclusion. In Tanya, it's assumed that, you see, the mistake is that Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Abamis, both are not two human beings. They're two spirits in one person, and they're bundled together. So any decision really made is not going to be from one or the other. It's going to be from both. The question is who's going to be the dominating force. It would be like saying, ask you a question: who makes the decision when you write something on paper? Is your mind making the decision? Are your fingers making the decision, or is your heart making the decision? The answer is it's all the above. You need a bunch of things together to work together to make such a decision, like in a team. So I don't know if you can really answer and identify, here's the decision maker. It's this piece in your brain that makes the decision.
Right,
I wouldn't go that way.
They're all working towards the same direction. We they're opposing.
No, but one second. But then let's go now when they oppose. So in the Chanami. So the question is who's going to win?
Who's going to win?
Right? In the Chanami.
It's a very stumpy question. The answer might be...
No, but who's going to win doesn't say necessarily who's finally making the decision. Who's going to win is just who's the most powerful voice.
Right.
Like, look, the Nefesh Abamis makes its case.
Because if it's the more refined you are, the Nefesh Elokis will win. The less refined you are, the Nefesh Abamis will dominate.
Well, you have situations, look, I'm sure we've had situations, your Nefesh Abamis had its very strong voice, and you chose not to follow it. Question is, what power chose? You have to say that Nefesh Elokis has power, and you allowed, and it was allowed, but who decides? It's not very, it doesn't say anywhere, it's a Bavista question. You have to say that there's an invisible force that is none of the above, that is, that uses each one. Something of that nature. And I never had this question. I know everybody asks this question. I don't have the question because it sounds to me like the question is based on the premise, because we live in a physical world, like who's at the steering wheel? It's not physical. This whole thing is based on I think you have to ask the question, what identifies a human being? Right. Forget about, let's say you had only a Nefesh Elokis, no Nefesh Abamis, let's for argument's sake. Who makes the decisions then? Then you have no problem. You just say Nefesh Elokis makes the decisions. But is that true?
Then there's no opposing force. There's only God.
Because just because there's no opposing force doesn't mean that makes the decision. That just means because there's no other voice. Right. The question is...
It's a tzaddik. How to give it tanis? He only has one force.
Does that bring into question the Nefesh HaSichlis and Nefesh HaChiyunis?
That's what I said, that there's a Nefesh HaSichlis is often the way.
It's not mentioned much in the time.
It doesn't matter, but Chassidus says clearly, this what I said is not in my Morim it says that in Tanya it says two nefashos and there's a third nefesh. He doesn't mention in Tanya, they say that. And that's the third nefesh is what makes the decision. In Tovshin Beis, Chaviv Adam, he says it beferish and in Mocha Mamorim.
Nefesh HaChiyunis?
That's like Nefesh HaSichlis. It's the same thing.
But he still has to be informed to the...
Sometimes Nefesh HaChiyunis is equated to Nefesh Abamis. Yeah. There's three. It says clearly in Chassidus that there's three nefashos. Look, it's true there's two, but to break it down, there's three. Because remember, it says Nefesh Elokis rests in the Seichel.
Nefesh HaSichlis is really Nefesh Abamis.
I'm telling you what it says in my mind. You're saying your own things. It's what it says in my mind is not what you're saying. It says in my mind that Nefesh HaSichlis is neutral. It's not Nefesh Elokis, not Nefesh Abamis. It hears both and makes a decision.
Who's more?
Number of Mamorim. Look in Likutei Torah in maybe Bahar, and look in Chaviv Adam Tovshin Beis. And the Rebbe brings it.
But he makes a decision based on your refinement. The more refined you are, the more he...
I don't know what that means exactly.
The inclination is towards the Nefesh Elokis.
It's not so mathematical, because I know people who are refined and make mistakes too. So what? I mean, there's no black and white thing. Certain people who refined all their lives and they have one big nisayon and then they can't, And it's another discussion. I don't want to go there right now because completely off target here. It deserves. Well, I'm sure Ayin Beis is going to come to this topic too, based on the Rebbe Rashab's record. I trust him to discuss this. But it's really a completely different subject, and it needs to be discussed thoroughly, properly. So again, hisbonus and midas, fine. So in the midah, you don't have, in the application, you don't have, like I said, the manufacturers or the producers are not necessarily have all the science behind it, the seichel behind it. So the achrachis is not there.
What do you touch achrachis?
I touch it compelling, the compelling intellectual arguments. Achrachis hadavar, what compels you to say that? In other words, all the logic behind it. So what led you to this conclusion that that ayin eliki is more powerful? The concept, for example, that yesh and yesh cannot go infinitely back, because finite things cannot have an infinite beginning. They have to have some beginning that put them there. That rule. The motion doesn't necessarily cannot weigh in on that. All it can tell you is that's the conclusion. I follow it. It's like anything. A person falls in love. After they dated somebody, they did everything they could, and their mind tells them this looks like a good person. And now your feelings are there, and your feelings have been checked by your mind, so you know it's like a healthy decision. It's not just based on a whim or some emotional infatuation or whatever. The emotion doesn't have all the logic of why how you came to it. The emotion is the conclusion. What's negated to me? Tell me what I need to do. Okay, this is a good thing to do. Let's go for it. On the other hand, the emotion adds something the mind doesn't add. It adds the application and the feeling for it. Now I love it. Like the mind can tell you, I've weighed all the options, and based on my logic, this option sounds less risky or more fitting. But I have no feeling in the matter. You say, what's your feeling? I have no feeling in the matter. The emotion takes over from there.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully is always a good word to add. Well, be'emes, yeah. I told you, apply this to any type of argument and many things. Just apply it, you'll see in a second. And you'll see how people are resisted actually. Mashiach is a perfect topic. Next time someone debates it, just say, let's go back to the drawing board. Everyone present their sources. You'll see the argument's going to stop right away because no one has their sources really clear. Because when's the last time people looked in their sources? And then if the other person presents sources, so you can compare notes. Okay, let's read everything. Let's see what's going on. It's not based on Hergeshim alone. There's, thank God, that we have plenty of content. Let's put it this way, even if there's a disagreement at the end, but at least it'll be based on something that's grounded instead of just an emotional reaction. Well, why are you all looking at me?
You don't join politics, and then you don't join arguments about Mashiach.
I don't join them, no, because they go nowhere, and they're based on my opinion, not on healthy things. In most cases. But if you want to have an intelligent conversation about it with sources, I think I know a few sikhs, so we can talk about it. And maybe there are sikhs that, as I told you, the Rebbe was a master at taught us how to write very ambiguously. Not everything has to be spelled out also. You can interpret things many ways, which is fine too. Who says everything has to be black and white? You're not going to find a sikh what year Mashiach is going to come, because the Rebbe never said it. He said it's now, in this generation. But he didn't say one day and this date. So you're not going to find that, and there's nothing to look for. So what? So we don't have an answer to that.
He didn't say Ani Mashiach, he didn't say Ani Rebbe.
Correct. He wouldn't say it's completely not the Rebbe's style.
Did he say that the Friedrich Rebbe was Mashiach L'Torah?
He did. He said it more than once. He said that Nasi Avadar is Mashiach of the Dar. So you can extrapolate from that by you the Rebbe is the Nasi, and therefore 2 + 2 = 4, right? I didn't say you can't. What I'm saying here is no political. I'm not suggesting anything here. I'm just saying if you have a conversation like this that we're having, we'll have no problem. But most conversations don't go this way. They end up being very emotional, and you're not a believer, and it's a lot to do with politics also today. It's mixed with too many stuff. Right. Not a problem. I think you could. I think any intelligent person you could sit down and have a conversation, as long as you pull away from conclusions before. We're having a conversation. Let's talk. What's wrong with that? I have conversations with people I completely disagree with. It's 2 separate things. And then you see some people are open to hearing a few opinions, and some people are just not. They're locked from the beginning. That you have to determine. That to me is usually a waste of time. I often say when someone wants to debate with me about something, I say, I just want to know one thing. Are you open to another conclusion? Of course, they always tell you, are you? So I say, I am. If you can. So usually that person says also, I am, and then in a few minutes you see they're not. I'm not here to judge because they can say the same thing about me. But you can tell. I mean, I'm not here to accuse anyone that way, but you see it, and once you see it, what are you supposed to do with that? Ego plays a big role. What can I say? Ego plays a big role. Look, I worked in Sikhs for 15 years. I had to subject myself every week to the Rebbe looking over everything. Sometimes he edited, sometimes he didn't, but he looked over everything. And he could have looked any time. His words. And he did. Shabbos, Friday night, you often saw the Rebbe reading the Sikha from that week. I'm not Muga. So he read it even if he didn't edit it. And he's reading what he's supposed to have said, not what I'm supposed to have said. So it's a pretty severe, but anyone that would be pretty, were you mechavan? So you come to a lot of soul searching and so-called reality checks of what is right and what is not. And it's not that simple. You can't. That situation, it really makes you extremely honest, because there's no playing games, and you get it over your head if you play. And also, personally, I took it seriously. I saw it as for posterity. I knew what's being written here. This is going to be the record forever. It's not a small matter to me. So I couldn't afford to bring in personal bias. It was by me like a crusade not to do that, not to allow my inclinations to affect. But how do you do that? Yeah, I always knew that, because I value. If you're a writer, you have to value the truth of what you're writing. It's not about you. It never can be about you. If it is, then you lose what kind of integrity is there? If you find out one day that I wrote something because I had a bad mood that day, so if I wrote a novel of my book, it's my achai, it's my problem. But I'm writing the Rebbe's words, and this is supposed to be the doctrine of Chassidus, and this is the document. That's to me that's abusive. That's criminal. Don't do it. If you're in that place, you shouldn't do it. I could tell you a story that happened. That was a very, very definitive moment. That was very powerful for me. Even till this day, it affects me. I remember I wrote a sikha. It was Shabbos. Remember Shabbos also, no tapes, no notes. There's nowhere to check whether it's all from memory.
Nobody was writing under the table there.
No Shabbos. No.
One guy had a recorder.
And Shabbos, they tried one. No. There was no games like that.
One guy he was exiled.
It also never happened. He tried. Nothing was recorded.
They recorded it.
There's a tape of a Fabrengen Simchus Torah, Tavshin Tazayim. Yeah, but that's after Havdalah was said, not by the Rebbe, by others. So you don't have the very clear tape of that. The Rebbe then told them afterwards not to do it again, because the Rebbe was still Yom Tovdik, so it's not like right to do, because the Rebbe is not supposed to be speaking tape recorder, right? Because it's not turning on the tape recorder; it's the magnetic, it's the
voice.
Yeah. But the Rebbe didn't know. Fine, but they did it. What was I saying? Oh, so I wrote the Sikha. It was a Shabbos. It was very complicated for brain. And I wrote up a good 30 pages, and there was like Tuesday already. 30 pages, a lot of work. Trust me, it's good 3 days and nights of work. And Rabbi Yael, who was like my senior colleague, he often would look over the sikhs, and I would give it to him. He looked it over, and he disagreed with the premise, which really meant a big basis of everything I wrote, not just a line. Like the whole premise had to be rewritten. He didn't, he said to me, "It's your call. You're the final say," because I was the writer. But I'm telling you from my understanding or recollection. Obviously, I was invested in being right, but I remember it was Tuesday night. I went home. I said, "Okay, let me think about it. Let me sleep on it, so to speak. And in the morning, I'll look at it over again, and we'll see." I asked a few other people. No one really had strong opinions. So, it was a subtlety, but it was also a fundamental difference. There's subtle things, but it was a key difference. And we couldn't ask the Rebbe. It was not one of those things you can just ask the Rebbe. It was not. We asked the Rebbe many things. I asked the Rebbe questions every day, but it was too basic to ask. It wasn't like, did you mean this? It was, it was not appropriate to ask. That's the bottom line. I remember that. And in the morning I went back to him and I said, okay, tell me your argument again. Let's start from scratch. Imagine we're starting Sunday. And he told me, he said, based on what the Rebbe said here, based on what the Rebbe said here, I went back to my notes that I wrote on Saturday night, Motzei Shabbos, which was the closest thing to what we heard. And I heard his thing. And I literally wrote down his main points. I wrote down my main points, on short paper, just to compare. And I went back to those notes and tried to read it all with an objective eye. But I knew, I was looking to be objective. It wasn't like I was not looking to be right. I wanted to be right. But I just said that aside. I said, it makes no difference. That does not matter here. And I just didn't let it speak to me. I had to go back to it with a fresh set of eyes. And I, what I did was I realized that you can go both directions. It wasn't like a black and a dunk, slam dunk, either way. But I thought his was a little closer to the original and what the Rebbe had said, based on my recollection. And I just sat and I tore it all up and I redid it. And this is a complete decision on my own. No one compelled me. I didn't have to answer to anyone. He told me his opinion. His opinion wasn't like 100%. He says it could be what you're saying, but he thinks it's this way. It was that type of... and I remember it was a very defining moment for me because I realized, and I always tell it to writers I work with, if you could do that, you're getting somewhere. For me, it was like it was a very healthy thing that happened because I was able to, I could do that. I knew later I could do it again, and I would not be blinded. That doesn't mean I haven't made mistakes, but it's happened other times as well. I'm able to go back, shut out everything that was there, and start like from scratch. And it's a critical thing in a real good process, because that way you catch a lot of mistakes and you have the courage to do that. And it's not easy to do. Trust me, it's not easy. But it's a very healthy thing to do. It's part of what we keep talking about. What was that chapter we keep saying about absorbing what the teacher says, not what you're saying?
No, but did you have pressure the last 2 years to try to write a certain way, to fit a certain style?
No. By whom?
By people who wanted a certain message to come out.
First of all, if you know me, nobody can pressure me.
The last 2 years,
no.
When there was a big hype then, and everybody was waiting.
No, there was no pressure because everybody was one direction.
Right.
And I was always, I'm not saying to toot my horn, I was never one extreme or another. I'm today exactly as I was 30 years ago. No difference. I never had this like a so-called zealousness and then regrets. No. I worked in Sikhs. For me, it was basically what the Rebbe wants to say. He says, my job is simply to be a neutral channel. No one asking me my opinion.
You try to find between the lines
No.
Not you, maybe on the staff.
You can say it was because my kefillah, because I'm so detached, maybe because I don't believe in anything.
Okay,
you could say that. Or you could say because of integrity.
Your team.
There were people, I can't say this for everybody, but I can say for myself, I wrote some of the most controversial sikhs that exist today. Shaftim, Nun Aleph. I'm the one that wrote that. From the Farbrengen, from memory. Yeah.
Wow.
I wrote Chaysara Nun Beis. Some of the ones that are most quoted.
Yeah, sure.
So I know them quite well. I know also that I remember how. And I could tell you right now, especially when it came to Mashiach, I applied this more than ever because I knew we were dealing here with a very sensitive subject. And to me, it was only what the Rebbe says matters. It makes no difference what my Hergeshim. It's ridiculous to mix my. By Chassidus Farbrengen, after the Sikh is published, we can Farbrengen. But it would be literally to me it would be. What's the word for criminal? To try to affect what it's the Rebbe's words. Lahavdil, if I was working for President Obama, same thing. I'm working for him. It's his words, not my words. What right do I have to change something because I have a feeling about it? I don't mean change, enhance, whatever, amplify. No. I was very, very careful when it comes to Novi. I remember the Sheftim Sichim. I remember the Farbrengen like today. It was a shocking Farbrengen. Shocking, and the Rebbe was very blunt about some things. It was a Novi, and he spoke very openly. And I remember that Farbrengen more than any Farbrengen. I probably remember one of the best because I realized that whatever he says exactly, I'm going to document exactly as he says it, without anything, no adding, no subtracting. I did nothing except organize, that it should be ready for publication. But it was from the Sikhs that I did least in adding, in like trying to explain or not. What the Rebbe said, he said, and that's it. And that's exactly what it was.
He was Magia?
Yeah. Rebbe's Magia. It's a regular Haggadah. There was nothing dramatic, but it was the message itself was what it was. I know till this day people come to me and say, "Did you mean this? Did you mean this?" It's some things there you can interpret in other ways, Also, the thing was, the important thing that a lot of people forget is that it was one out of many sikhs. It wasn't a common thread, that sikh. It wasn't like the Rebbe the next week just continued that thread. He said it once, and that was it. He never made reference to it again. Maybe one place a little. But, so that also told me something. Like, in other words, it was, for whatever reason, had to be said. So that it wasn't like, the Rebbe consistently kept saying that, like every Shabbos, there's a Novi in the generation. He said it once. That doesn't take away from what he said, but it's an interesting point. Why didn't Rebbe make that the key point if it's so central? And he did make other points key, like learning of Yari Gul and Mashiach. He did continue speaking about Mashiach, but he didn't speak with that type of... And a lot of people take that sikh and they almost forget everything else. To me, that's also a distortion. Even though the sikh is true, but it's context.
It's like you can't deny that sikh, though,
No, of course not.
Yeah.
The Rebbe's words. What's written there is what he said. There's nothing there that anybody made up. Who would write that there's a Novi generation? It's ridiculous. No one would write such a thing. The Rebbe said it for sure. The question is how much to amplify it, how much to this. There's a lot to say about this. By Fabrengens, the Rebbe said Menachem Shmai. You could see it here on tape even. It's not uncommon. It's a Gemara. Yeah. That's what we do. The Rebbe happens to have the same name as the Gemara. What can you do about it? Look, without politics, it's very clear. The Rebbe, a tzaddik, if you give the Rebbe at least the benefit of the doubt of being a tzaddik, Ish Elokim, if God wants the Rebbe to be Mashiach, he would not say no. Moshe Rebbe, he probably would argue like Moshe maybe, but if God, that's what God wants. And the Rebbe was dedicated to what God wants, not what he wants. It wasn't some self-nominating process. That's a simple thing. That's why the whole issue is moot. Who cares? If God wants the Rebbe to be, then it is. It's all about that. That's what the Rebbe would answer. So why do we have to answer differently? The Rebbe wasn't coming to elect himself. That's not how it works. That's not Moshe Rabbeinu. That doesn't make sense. In Torah and Yiddishkeit, you don't have anybody getting up and saying, "Hey, I'm here to tell you something." The Rebbe was a Yishamiti. It says in Sfarim that the Nasi Avedar is Mashiach. The Rebbe quoted it. Why he quoted it? He felt he wanted to quote it. I have no problem with that at all. It's not a Rebbe's Chiddush. It's Sfarim have to say that. I don't even see it as controversial, frankly. What's the big thing? That in every generation there's a bus of a dam that can be Mashiach. If you believe in Mashiach, that's a given. You're not going to create that a malach. The problem is controversial is because we live in a world where that really is not open to Mashiach ideas. And the second thing is a lot of times the way it's presented is very disturbing. It's like people are very condescending and very dogmatic. So it's a turnoff for many. But what's wrong with the concept? What's the difference? I'm sure that in the last year of the 6,000 years, if someone says, "Hey, this person's Mashiach," there'll also be controversy. How could you say someone's Mashiach? There's only one more year, so what? Because we're not, it's another topic. We're off the topic here.
The whole problem is the fact that we make it personal as opposed to just...
Yeah, it becomes personal. It becomes like you're a believer, I'm not a believer. That type of thing. It becomes who's in control. There's a lot of other sideshows going on. Have very little to do with Emes. Look, to me, it's Even Abech. If someone really believes in Mashiach, they should be making a revolution like Mark Zuckerberg. What are they busy altogether yelling? Go make a revolution. Go change the world. That's what the Rebbe said. It says clearly what the world is going to look like when Mashiach comes. I don't see anybody being that passionate about that part. That's why I'm very cynical about all this these arguments, because they don't come to anything. I've already said this. There's no nafkamina. Who cares? Both are not doing anything in any what I would consider global way. So it's a little argument in the ghetto. Big thing. So called mikvanais. That's how I see it. Honestly, it's a parochial disagreement. Okay, so fine. It's like saying who's the rav, what's kashrus, which restaurant to go to. That itself is sad that it's come to that, but that's how I see it. I was speaking to, there's really radical guys in 770. I don't know, for some reason they like me because I guess I worked in the Sikhs and I don't get involved in politics. So once one Shabbos, they also, like a big circle, like 30, 40, the real hardcore, what they call Meshichas. I don't even like that term. But, yeah. And they're talking to me, blah, blah, blah. So I said to them, I am very impressed by your passion. You guys are ready to walk 8 hours, 12 hours. They can walk to Albany, New York.
Not Albany.
Not yet. Not quite, but...
Not Albany yet.
Right. Yeah. Montreal. They'll come, like, they leave Pesach, they'll come some Chusteda. So what? They'll be there on time. You go to River, no, they're passionate, and I always admire passion, even if it's misguided, because passion is passion, it's energy. I said to them, but I'm wondering, and I didn't say critical, I said them very nicely, I said, I'm wondering, how come this passion, none of it is going toward one key thing the Rebbe said, Lilmud Inyan Gula Mashiach. Exactly what we're learning, you have to learn it, to be it. If you don't know what it is, it's very hard to wait for it, or want it, or long for it. So they said, like what? I said, that there should be in every corner in Manhattan should be a shir in Gula Mashiach, a normal shir that people can go to. I don't think there's one shir. Maybe one, I don't even know of it. That's a simple thing. You're all in New York. Why don't you just do that? You go on Mitzrayim. Very good idea. Okay. No, fine. They didn't come with the idea. Which itself, as anyone reads the Sikhs, that's like consistent. That's not one Sikh. That's tens of Sikhs. The Rebbe says that. So one of them says, we don't know how to give a shir. So I said, you know what? I'll give you all my time. I'll train you how to give a good shir. Just call me after Shabbos. And I said, if you don't call me, it also tells me something.
That's what you said?
Yeah. And no one ever called. The next Shabbos, one guy comes over, I know he never called. So I said, so what does that say? You have a very nice passion. Everything is beautiful. But when it comes to the real work, you guys are just not there. So in other words, when the real war starts and you have to go out and fight, you're good in 770, you're yelling. That's very nice. It's like yelling in what do they say? Shushket in Arbel? How do you say that? You know the expression? Like somebody yelling into his sleeve. It's a big secret. I'm not saying to be critical, I'll just point out how things get misguided. And there's I would love to see that. One guy of all these people take the passion and create equivalent of a Facebook Mashiach type of moment. And we have thousands of people. There has to be someone that is capable like that. It's not like, the numbers dictate out of 1,000 people, and usually it's the population, there's one or two that have that type of genius or whatever. But it's misguided. That's the thing. It's not directed. Maybe also we don't think globally. Most people don't think globally. They think locally, and that definitely doesn't go anywhere. That's a sad. This is 20 years, and we're talking about now 18 years from Gimel Tammuz, right? It's pretty big. It's a lifetime. So I don't see things changing unless there's a new generation, unless somebody, that's why I always say, I think it's a new generation. You need some 20-year-old, some Meshugana that has that type of vision, consults with the right people, I think can happen, 100%.
Most of us, I'm speaking for myself, but I assume other people, passion is going down.
Well, passion goes down as you age. Yeah. Listen, who's the Rebbe's army? 18, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, the new couples. The 40-year-olds, people the 40-year-olds the Rebbe spoke to, they already had their lives. I'm not saying it to be critical, just you're already settled. We're not being pioneers. It was young people who didn't know what a budget meant. If they knew what a budget was, most of the shluchim would say, I'd never have gone. They didn't even know what the word meant. Budget, accounting, some still don't know, but many learned on the job. Some have become brilliant, administrators and so on. But they all went without no training, no knowledge, nothing. Some people don't even know how to read Hebrew. I should add. but they're there. They're on the front line. What time we have? So let's go a few more. Because the whole chapter is a long chapter. I don't think I'll finish this chapter. Okay, so we've established that his bonus is his bonus. The midah is informed by it, but the midah is not a saga. And what radiates is only by from a makif, only in a makif, only the conclusion. But the whole science behind it, the whole achrachis that led you to this conclusion, That's the domain of contemplation. And in truth, the primary arousal or awakening of the feeling is from the Hergish Aliki, that divine sense that is felt in the soul through the contemplation. Does he mean the same Hergish Aliki he spoke about before? That was in the abundance? Probably. Sounds similar. Because the divine soul has at its core, inherently or innately. What's the between inherent and innate? Is there a difference?
To me, there's no difference.
You remind me of the guy by the Tzemach Tzedek's table.
Innate may not be awake.
Awake, like dormant?
Yeah.
But inherent could also be dormant.
Inherent doesn't have
That
to
means
be.
you're born with it. And the other one, you can be either.
Inherent means once you acquire it, it's
It could
inherent.
be both.
Okay.
Could be one
So Nate is deeper. Nate is more. I hear. You know, it's reminds me of the story with Tzemach Tzedek. A guy was by the Tzemach Tzedek table, and like Tzemach Tzedek, and he said he was like saying to somebody, "What was the chiddush of Tanya? What's the Tanya uvgetan?" That was his expression. You know, what did Tanya contribute? Tzemach Tzedek heard him, so Tzemach Tzedek asked him if he ever learned Tanya. So he says no. He says, "In you, Taka, nothing didn't contribute anything." Did it to Taka Garnish to Uvgetan? That's what he said. Okay, because the Nefesh Elokis innately or core is an atiyah, has an inclination and hamshacha and a drawing to be drawn to. It's drawn to Elokus, to godliness. Atzi to Elokus. Atzi. In Yiddish, atzi is hamshacha. Atzi is like a flame. When a pull. You know, when a flame is like drawn, it's drawn to.
Draw and pull is the same thing.
Correct.
It's kind of the opposite.
There's push and pull, but this is pull. This is a attraction. An attraction at sea is a lean. Yeah. Think of it like this. Think like a flame is here. A flame is here. When you put a bigger flame here, this flame is going to be drawn to it because it naturally is drawn to that. So he says, so when the Nefesh Elokis, the divine soul, feels a divine revelation, it naturally is drawn to with love and a yearning, a longing to that Eir Eloki. And the Meichin are the carriers. They would bring and reveal this divine revelation, this divine energy, that it should be revealed in the Midas. So, okay, so what did he say now? The Nefesh Elokis has be'etzem netiyah. And then, so the Nefesh Elokis has a netiyah, an inclination and a leaning toward that even before you contemplate. It just has it by birth. Okay? Then when you contemplate on something that's divine, that there's the divine force that gives life, so it awakens that yearning and longing in the Nefesh Elokis, and that when you're learning, the Moichin, which is contemplating, carries that to the Midah, that the Midah should feel an attraction to it. That's what he's saying here.
It seems like it has to go up before it goes down.
Yeah. In other words, even the Midas of the Nefesh Elokis also are drawn, but they're not revealed. It's just it's innate. It's dormant rather. Well, be'emes, Ikari says, what's the be'emes there? He calls it in a mer b'amid l'klal.
You're born with it. So all the arguments go away.
We're talking about the nefesh. It's innate in the
Nefesh.
Which l'cheira means, or seemingly means, that it's innate also in the midas of the Nefesh Elokis. However, it's dormant because they don't sense it. The hisbonus is what awakens it, and then there's the being drawn to it. That's what it looks like. What he's saying. Because what's the be'emes? Before he was making the case that Meichin is not midas. Meichin, even the hergish in the mind, is still contemplation, and midas is another stage, and at that stage, the midah, there's not meir. Intelligence, the science, the thinking behind it is not radiating into the midah. That's what he said. And now he says, but emes, in truth, Ikar says in other words, what he's saying here, I think, is that the Ikar Hergish Amida is also not from the Hisbonenus, the contemplation. That's just the carrier. It's really from this natural connection to God. He's making a bigger case how Midas is distant from Meichen. The first point was that intelligence, the science behind it, is not in the feeling. The feeling is only a result of that science, of the thinking. That's clear. And the Meichen remains removed. If you ask the Midah can't tell you the reasoning behind it. It can tell you the conclusion. But you could say, okay, so the Midah, you could say, is like the last step after a long intellectual process. The Midah is the final application, the result of a long philosophical contemplation. But now he's going deeper. He's saying, in truth, the Midah is not an outgrowth of the Meichen. The Midah has naturally an inclination to God.
Wow. Then
He's saying
they resonate with
It's not because logic dictates that God is that Elokus is the Iker. It's because the Nefesh Elokis has a natural thing. But what happens is the Meichen need to arouse it. The Meichen are awakening it by contemplating on this divine force, and all this contemplation that awakens it, and it reveals it in the Midas.
Wow.
Which means the Midah is even more distant than the Meichen. So the Midah is not an outgrowth of Meichen. It's number one, it's an application, doesn't have the whole ideas behind it. Number two, its real connection to Elokus is not based on intelligence. It's based on an inherent element, an innate element. You want to say more than that?
Yeah, he's trying to bring out the case that it has to be the Hagesh Elki that's going to ignite the spilus in the Midas. Because only from the Meichen itself.
That's exactly what I just said.
Not necessarily does it ignite. Right, and he spells it out.
Yeah.
It has to be through the Hisbonenus, right?
No.
Hisbonenus is the catalyst. If not, it's all asleep. Then what? Your Midas are busy with Elam Hazeh, and the Midas of Nefesh Elokis are dormant. Bottom line, there's nothing to awaken them.
But what are we saying in actuality here? We say we have the Nefesh, and then over there the Nefesh expresses itself how? First through Hisbonenus, then when, then what? Through Midas, which come through the Hisbonenus. Ultimately, both your Meichen and your Midas are expressions of that Nefesh, and that Nefesh has a Hergish Elokis, an innate seed to Elokus.
Okay, so yeah, but that's not the point of this mimer here. What he wants to really say is that there's two different elements in this experience. There's the Meichen experience of it, and there's the Midas experience of it. That's the point that he wants to say. There's a reason he's going to there. He wants to explain that the Meichen has something the Midas don't have.
So it's the Hergish,
which is the pure understanding of God.
The science of it.
Yeah. Which has a mila, because you're much you then the hergish for something is more personal and is obviously important, but the Meichen is soon going to explain is far closer in understanding God. The Meichen understands. The Midas don't understand God. They feel, and feeling has a mila, but it has a chsar. That's what he's leading to.
Two separate.
But the Hergish is nationalistic, right?
Yeah, but he started with the Hergish Elokis. Is also in his bonus you have a Hergish Eloki. He said that's the.
It's two Hergishes.
No, but that looks like that Hergish Elokis is affecting the Midas. Let's continue. It may be clearer as we speak, but I think it's emerging. This is the reason why at times Gamshem is beinin betuv. Even when he's a good contemplation, he's really focused and contemplating on something. Nevertheless, it does not. The heart doesn't get excited. The heart is not affected. In other words, the proof that contemplation alone is not what brings it is because if it doesn't have a Hergish Elokis, you can contemplate from today till tomorrow and you're not going to have an awakening.
But do you have to consciously, what did he say? If you have to consciously acquire this Hergish? Like, how do you just buy it in the store?
First of all, he said it's innate. The Nefesh Elokis naturally has it.
But you got to feel it in the body, no?
That's what these bonus is a catalyst that awakens that.
So then, how could you be mismarted betuv and still not and not?
Because you don't have the hergish. You could just be mathematically thinking of the science, and it's not, and you're not touching the hergish of it.
A
Allow yourself.
Remember, we said before, there's 3 steps. Hisbonenus, first is you understand something. 2 is hanocha. It's leitzich, it resonates. It's internalized. And 3, you have a hergish in it. A sense. Take away number 3, and you could at times he says, not always, it could ultimately not affect you. Because for example, a person can learn Atzilus, and it doesn't affect them at all. They understand it all, but it's an idea. They didn't get the hergish in it, the hergish aliki in it. It's a concept. It happens all the time. Never happened to you.
It's another subject.
It's a subject. You understand the subject. Now, the point that's critical here is like this. Look, he hasn't finished. Now, I would not jump to conclusions until we finish this whole subject, because it clearly is a lot in this. But I think it's moving along here.
Anyway.
What's confusing for me is what turns on this hergish or not, or what causes it to.
Well, the entire previous chapter talks about the power why you need hisbonenus, because without it you don't have an awakening of feelings.
So that process
that will not happen on its own.
So that process that explained in the previous chapter, that's how you awaken that hergish aliki.
Exactly correct.
Innate. In other words,
innate in the mind and in the heart. Yeah.
It's innate in the mind also.
Of the nefesh alekis, the mind of the nefesh alekis. Why not? Even if it's.
He only uses that term for.
No, he uses on the nefesh alekis. He doesn't say. Yeah, he uses on the whole. Yeah, innate in the nefesh.
In the nefesh, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, in the nefesh. Yeah.
The more edel you are, the more you can have more.
In other words, you could have a hergish aleki in mind without midas also. That's what he said before.
Oh, so it's innate in the midas.
It's innate in the nefesh aleki. That's what he says, not in midas or meichen.
But one would think, if you
nefesh aleki has meichen and midas, has both.
One would think that if you elicit or you focus on that hergish aleki, which is nafshiyistic, through your hisbonenus, that you have to come to the midas.
Well, he didn't finish the subject. Maybe he's going to address it. He didn't. It's just the beginning of a long chapter. Okay. It's only the first third of the chapter. He may speak about it. He may not. I would read on. I'm trying to right now read the pshat in the words. I'm not drawing any conclusions. We're in the brainstorm of it. Like trying to get what he's saying. That's what I would do right now. Try to understand what he's saying, but understand. I'm not talking about skipping lines. Let's get so step by step. There's a lot of steps here. I just not lose focus. He's trying to make a case that with all the fact that it wakes up midas, it's still midas are not meichen. That's the key thing here. There's another dimension called meichen that is not midas. That's the key line that he wants to explain here, because that goes back to Atzilus and Biyah. We'll get back to it.
Or Ilavala.
The second Ilavala, right? That they're different personalities. V'harigam. So he says. So therefore, that's what he explains why. Sometimes there won't be a hergish aleki because there won't be a sparas belev because there was no hergish aleki. Harigam a hergish aleki ain't a dema k'mei shu b'meichen l'gabe shu b'midas. In a dema k'mei, yeah. Because also the feeling, the divine feeling, sensation, is not similar the way it's in the mind and the way it's in the midas. Because if it was similar, okay, another additional point. That they're not similar. Why? The levadzes, 2 reasons. The levadzes, besides the fact is canal, besides the fact that the contemplation, the comprehension rather, does not radiate in the emotions, so that already tells you that the hergish aleki that you have in the mind is an intellectual feeling, sense. And that doesn't go into the midas. So number 1, that's one thing. Hinegam, additionally, a hergish aleki, this hergish aleki, I'll just skip the parentheses for a moment. Even the hergish aleki, there's a difference. In meichin it's revealed, and in midas it's distant and diminished. What does he say in the parentheses? Gama hergish aleki, shebem ezeu ikar chayes hamida. This hergish is really the true life, the true sustenance of the midah. B'midah shebemeichin hu shehergish aleki u'b'chinas pnimi. Right. And midah shebemeichin, that's the hergish in the meichin. There, the hergish aleki is in a very internalized way because you're sensing it with your mind, with your understanding. And because of that, it's a very true and a true awakening and an arousal, arousing and awakening, or arousing and excitement. What he means by true here, not necessarily more emotional. He means true that it's a very real experience. It's not a what's the word for it? It's not frivolous. It's based on a really intellectual concept. So there's intellectual excitement. We spoke about this Bailas in the Meichen. But then when it comes in Midas, in Meichen it's far more revealed. It's revealed, and Midas it's distant and concealed. This needs explanation, obviously. V'yesh leimer, and we can say the Mashakosa Beitz Chaim, the Erein Sof, Meir B'Keser, V'Chachma B'Kiruv Mokim. It says in Eitz Chaim that Erein Sof in Keser and Chachma radiates, illuminates from like closely. Ubebina B'Richuk Mokim, and Bina like from a distance. Ubezah Derech Halein, and like in Midas through a window. This is something we discussed earlier at length. Yeah. Umavur B'Hadrush. Shalzeh HaMaimer, and explains in the drush on this Maimer. I'm not sure which drush he means. Shakavanu hal eretz of shemer b'keser v'chochma b'kiruv v'bebina. But drush Shalzeh HaMaimer, probably the drush in Eitz Chaim. And the intention is Erein Sof that radiates. What
Whatever I said before.
What does it say in the drush? That Kavon al Erein Sof shemer b'kiruv.
That's what he said before.
He said that. He said a minute before that. Erein Sof meir b'keser b'kiruv.
This is also mevur in the drush. That's what I understand.
What does the mevur b'drush say that doesn't say the line before? And the midas through a window, you have to say that's also distant. You can say that according to Chassidus, this Eitz Chaim is the hergesh shaliki, is the divine sensation, how it descends from level to level. It's a very powerful line. We should stop here. That's my opinion. It's getting into a whole new complicated series of... Yeah, I'm going to go back. I have to go back on it because it's not... We'll stop here. And let's stop here. So let me just say, we did the first half of chapter 151, page 296 and 297.